In 1904, the St. Paul Coal Company constructed a mining site. It was located in a mining town called Cherry, which was about 90 miles south of Chicago, Illinois. The Cherry Mine was opened on December 11, 1905, and only lasted around 4 years before a tragedy happened. After the disaster occurred, the St. Paul Coal Company went bankrupt. The Cherry Mine disaster occurred on November 13, 1909. About 480 men and boys as young as 10 were working in the dark and dirty Cherry coal mine. Warren Roberts said, "Without exception, it was the safest mine in the state." Most of the miners were immigrants originally from Europe. They came from many countries such as Austria, Italy, Lithuania, and Sweden. These men usually worked in less skilled and more physically demanding jobs. They lived in row houses near the mine and spoke a variety of languages. All miners knew the risks of mining since an average of 5 to 7 miners died monthly in the Illinois mines. Most dreaded to start their workday knowing that they could be killed. They knew that if they didn't work as fast, they would not be able to make enough money to support their families because they were often paid on how much coal they mined. Therefore, the miners hurried and did not follow safe mining practices. Mining companies showed little concern for their workers' safety, and if a miner was lost, they could easily replace them. The companies were not held financially liable for the workers' injuries or deaths. In the early years of mining, there weren't many safety regulations. From 1901 to 1925, a total of 256 mining disasters occurred because of those same reasons. A few include Stag Canyon No. 2 in New Mexico and Monongah No. 6 and 8 in West Virginia. Just in 1909, there were 20 coal mine disasters, the Cherry Mine disaster included. Miners descended into the mine by 7 a.m. on the day of the tragedy. They had put homemade kerosene torches on the walls of the mine because the electrical system had gone out. A torch began to drip kerosene onto some hay, which was intended for a mule stable. Sparks from the pickaxes ignited a small fire when interacting with the kerosene. Miners noticed but left it alone for someone else to put out. When the fire started to get worse, they tried to move the cart of hay down the mine, but that only made the flames spread. Some workers turned on a fan in reverse, hoping to pull smoke out of the mine. This was a mistake and only made the fire spread throughout the tunnels. It set the wooden staircase, the one that was used in the escape shaft, ablaze. The only escape they had now was through the main shaft. A whistle sounded that indicated there had been an accident, the noise wives and children dreaded. There were 12 brave men that made multiple trips in the cages of the mine shaft to rescue the miners. They made 6 successful trips and rescued many men. Unfortunately, the 7th trip was fatal. The cage operator misread signals to pull up the cage. He left them down in the inflamed mine too long, and the 12 heroes burned up. On Thursday, November 18, 1909, the first body was brought out of the mine. They identified the bodies by letting families look at their watches, jewelry, personal items, or unique articles of clothing. In total, an estimated 259 men didn't make it out alive. There were some miracles in this tragic story. A group of people dove into the mine initially to retrieve dead bodies, but found 21 men who had survived by building a wall of coal, mud, clay, gravel, and rocks that they had used to block off the poisonous gases. The 21 men resulted to eating wax that fueled their headlamps, belts, and even their shoes. They had waited 8 days. By then, they were starting to run low on oxygen and tore down the walls only to hear a search party. The search party rescued the survivors, who they named the 8-Day Men. Daniel Holifick, one of the 8-Day Men, survived the mining disaster but unfortunately died the next day. Steve Stout, a schoolteacher and owner of Starved Rock Camera in Utica, said, "The image of that is just so horrific, I couldn't shake it. I had to write about it." He wrote the book Black Damp, the story of the Cherry Mine disaster. Carrington Torrey also wrote a book called Trapped, the 1909 Cherry Mine disaster. People were in disbelief over the events at Cherry Mine. At the time, M. Donald, president of the United Mine Workers of Illinois, said, "The safest mine in Illinois, as the St. Paul Coal Company declared the Cherry Mine to be, has turned out a veritable death trap for 400 men. Gross negligence in constructing the mine in defiance of all provisions approved by competent mining engineers was the fundamental cause of the greatest mine disaster in the history of the United States." The Cherry Mine disaster, as well as other small mining disasters, changed mining history forever. In 1910, Congress inaugurated the United States Bureau of Mines. It monitored mine safety and was an enforcer of new technology and science in the mines. Though this agency was disbanded in 1955, those responsibilities are now handled by the United States Department of Labor. Illinois also enforced stronger mine safety rules by passing another law that turned into the Illinois Workmen's Compensation Act, but only did so because of the public's outrage. The law firms of Katz, Friedman, Eagle, Eisenstein, Johnson, and Barrick summarized this act as follows. The Illinois Workers' Compensation Act provides the only legal remedy against the employer for a worker injured on the job. This outline is not a substitute for legal advice and should not be relied on without consultation with an attorney from our office. This is a brief outline of the Act. The Workers' Compensation Institute and thousands of court and Illinois Workers' Compensation Commission decisions interpreting it are quite complicated. The facts in every case make each claim unique. In Illinois, new training and certification is required to operate machinery in the mines. The disaster also enforced child labor laws, which prevent young boys from working in the deathly mines. The Department of Labor in the state of Illinois has a child labor law that says, "Child labor law regulates the employment of workers under 16 years of age." The law protects children by 1. Requirement employment certificates. The certificate confirms that a minor is old enough to work, physically capable to perform the job, and that the job will not interfere with the minor's education. 2. Prohibiting work in hazardous occupations, and 3. Limiting working hours. All work before 7 a.m. and after 7 p.m. is prohibited. However, work until 9 p.m. is allowed from June 1st through Labor Day. Even though this was a tremendous disaster, it couldn't change these laws alone. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory helped change the laws as well. This happened in 1911, and because of the fire, labor laws, child labor laws, and fire safety laws were written. In 1912, 8 bills were passed, and in 1913, 25 were passed because of the fire. Some regulations were not met in the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, and so the fire could have been prevented. The laws force workplace doors to be kept unlocked and that they swing out to prevent people from being trapped indoors, which were 2 critical parts in the Triangle Factory deaths. Not only did the cherry mine disaster change laws, it changed people's lives forever. Families were left alone and heartbroken. Ernest P. Bicknell asked this question: how were the widows and orphans to get through the winter? In June the following year, the families affected received a relief fund collected in Chicago. They raised about $1,800 for the families. They gave the affected widows compensation based upon the family's size. Chicago sent grocery items to the families also. Some of the items include a total of 500 pounds of flour, 1,000 loaves of bread, and 500 cans of soup. A monument was developed on May 15, 1971, dedicated to the lives lost in the tragedy, and an annual ceremony is held on November 14th and 15th in Cherry, Illinois. Dennis Suttles, a genealogical research librarian at the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum, helped coordinate an exhibit called The Flames Caught Us, which contains at least 30 panels of artifacts based on the Cherry mine disaster, most of which came from the Princeton Public Library. The exhibit was named after a quote by John Flood, a merchant in Cherry. One of the artifacts was an old pocket watch that belonged to Joseph Yearley, who was only 20 years old when he died in the mining disaster. The watch, which was in fairly good condition, has been passed down in his family through generations. Through time, the Cherry mine disaster has still impacted us today.